Kathy from Eclectic Images, and welcome to a bit of crafting with Kathy. In today's tutorial I'm doing a scene on gloss card. This is an Aussie scene, and what I wanted to create was an end of the summer parched drought sort of look, or an outback look. I wanted it to look really dry and reflect the browns and parched colours that you often see in Australia. So the stamps that we're going to use is some from our Aussie range, the Camel, the Outback Rocks, also going to go into the grass set and the reeds for a little bit of stuff in the foreground. And one that I haven't got there to show you is the webbing texture, which we've used to create some parched lines on the earth. Now the inks that we're going to use are from the Catherine Pooler range, apart from the Versamark that we use for embossing. The rest of them we're using Midnight for our basic stamping, and then for our colouring we'll go Lemongrass from Spa collection. From the Neutrals collection we've got Icing on the Cake, Over Coffee and Sandcastle, the browns. And then from the Party collection we've got some Suede shoes, some Tiki torch and Something Borrowed. And we're going to be doing all of our applying with some brushes, so let's go. Okay, now I'm going to emboss the camel first so that I can then do everything around him and he'll stay in the foreground. And because I want him to be quite strong, I'm going to, rather than stamping him in the Midnight, I'm going to actually stamp and emboss him, which is going to make him be the most dominant feature of the card. So we're just wiping over with an anti-static pad, and then we'll find Mr. Camel and our Versamark ink. Now with both my Versamark ink and my Catherine Pooler Midnight, I have re-inked them before this session. They're two ink pads that do like to be kept quite juicy. So now we stamp this with his neck going off the side of the card. So it looks like he's just peeking in. Remember, your gloss card is slippery, so just place your stamp down carefully and don't let go of it with both hands and then come back to it, because you're likely to slip. Once it's there, it's the opposite, it tends to be sticky, so you've got to peel up carefully. Now I'm just going to dip that into our black embossing powder. Now the cardstock I'm using is the full gloss card. It's not a photographic card, it is full gloss. The difference being that a photographic paper is designed so that when it comes through your printer, the inks are already dry. So it's designed for inks to dry quickly on it. What we want here is we want the inks to actually not dry quickly so that we've got some blending time on our card. So I'll just move the embossing powder out of the way, and I'm just going to have a quick, we'll just brush off any excess of the scratch paper and have a quick look and make sure there's none on our card where we don't want it. So brush off any extra little bits, but the anti-static pad looks like it's done its job pretty well. Okay, now we'll just heat that up with the heat gun. I'm just warming the card a little bit first. You can also warm it by heating a little bit on the back of the card. Sometimes, not so much with a nice sunny day like today, but sometimes in cooler weather your cardstock can be a little bit damp feeling and tends to curl more. So I often like to just warm everything up, and also at the same time we're warming up the heat gun. And then I can come in and focus more heat and get that embossing powder doing its thing without getting too much curling of the card. So we wait till that powder's gone nice and shiny, and then we move on to the next bit. So it should raise up and go smooth and quite shiny, and that looks perfect. So at the moment I'm just looking at it across the light so I can make sure that it's all shiny and there's no little dry looking patches, because that would mean I'd need to go back and give them an extra heat. Now our next stamp we're going to grab is the Outback Rocks. Now this one, you can see I use it a lot with inks like archival inks or the Catherine Pooler Midnight, which do stain your stamps. Doesn't affect the quality of the stamp at all, as long as you still give it a wipe clean between inkings so that you don't contaminate another ink pad, but it won't actually damage the ink pad at all to get stained. But what I do try and be very careful of is to try and not get the backing too stained, because if you do, it makes it a bit harder to see where you're stamping your stamp. If you still maintain that being a bit see-through, you can actually see where you're placing your stamp. But before we do that, we're just going to cover up our camel with a mask. So this is where I've stamped him on a post-it note and cut it out. And this means that our Outback Rocks will actually go in behind him. And I want them up fairly high because I want to have a fair bit of parched earth in the front. So we're just going to line that up and place the stamp in there. Now I'm doing it in the black. I could also do it in the icing on the cake too if I wanted them to be brown and not stand out as much. I must admit this is habit that I tend to go for stamping most of my main images in black. Now I just need to ink the other end of the stamp slightly, just so that we can get, helps if you ink the right end of the stamp that you need. Matthew's rolling his eyes already. We're back into let's just wing it. And we'll just stamp a little bit of that in the other side, just so that our picture continues along both sides of our camel. Wonderful. Now we're just going to give that a wipe clean on a damp cloth. So if I just wipe straight across, I'm wiping the ink off without smearing it onto that backing area. And as I said, that helps to keep your stamp easier to see where you're placing it. Now I've also got just a lint-free cloth on my lap, and that's I just give the stamp a bit of a dry, and that also makes sure that there's no ink left there. Okay, now before we can start doing any blending, we've got to make sure this backing area is really dry. I would normally heat set the midnight ink onto the gloss card, and it does take a few minutes, so I have actually pre-stamped and embossed one so that we can get straight on with the blending and colouring. Okay, so to build up our earth tones, I want to have a little bit of the lemongrass in first. And really, this is going to go nearly everywhere, so I'm not going to bother masking as we put this on. So I pick up a bit of ink with your big brushes. Now this is the number 10 Future brush that I'm using. We have these either individually or as sets of 5, and we do have them in some of our other brush sets. I only ever ink the very end of the brush. This way you don't get the other bristles contaminated, and it means for some of the effects that we might want to do with the brushes, we've got this area of bristles cleaner, and it helps with the blending. For this one though, we're just going to do some circles. So start off on your scratch paper and then circling on. Now we can cover him, except not his muzzle area. I want to keep that quite light. And now when I've just re-inked freshly, I'll just go back to starting off on the scratch paper and then working onto the card. We'll end up covering most of this up. I really want it at the area just before the rocks. So I'm not too worried if my colouring's not too even on the bottom edge, because I know I'm going to be putting a lot more colour into there. But I want it lovely and blended when we get to that point. Now we're also going to cover the rocks with it. Now when I get closer to the edge of the rocks, I'm actually going to lay the brush down a bit and just push the ink up a bit, because I'm happy to, I don't want the colour going all the way. If we end up with a little bit of a glow in the sky and on the rocks, it's going to make it look a little bit heat shimmery. Now I've been experimenting with some heat shimmer. Not quite happy with all the experiments so far, so we're just going to let this one have a little bit of a glow. Right, let's move on to another colour. So that's our lemongrass. Now I'm going to come in and start adding some browns in there, and mainly sandcastle and over coffee. So with the sandcastle, which is our softer brown, just give my brush that's already done a bit of darker brown a clean off. And this time I am going to mask him, because when I start putting some brown on the camel, I want it to be a little bit more controlled. So let's mask him, and we're going to work from our lower edge up and cover nearly all of that lemongrass. We'll really leave just a glow just before we get to the rocks. Now, if you're needing to hold the card in another spot, I'm just picked up, this is another mask for a different purpose, but I'm just going to lay it there just so I've got somewhere to put my fingers, so that I don't get any oils from my skins coming onto the card, any oil from my skin coming onto the card, or any sweat or anything else that might leave an imprint on the card which will make the ink not take. Or once I've actually done some colouring in an area, you don't want your fingerprints then actually lifting off colour. So it just helps to hold on to it where you've got your mask, or lay a bit of paper towel or a bit of mask over an area, just to give yourself somewhere to hang on to it. Okay, I'm going to come in now with the webbing texture. When I find which block I've got that loaded onto, there it is. Okay, so the webbing texture, it's not quite a parched earth pattern, and it's got me thinking that maybe I need to make a stamp of cracked earth, but it's still got sort of these wavy lines. So I'm going to use, in some areas it's a little bit more dense, and other areas it's a bit more open. So I'm going to use the more open parts, and we're going to stamp it. We'll leave him covered up. I'm going to stamp it in the same sandcastle, and just ink up and just stamp it on a few different angles, and just get a little bit of cracks in the earth showing. Put him back if he moves around at all. Now on my sample I used coffee, and I was worried that was a little bit dark, so we're trying this with sandcastle, and then I'll have to look at it and see whether I'm happy, and I can always come in with a bit of a darker brown if I think I would like it darker. So I'm just picking out little areas that look a little bit more open and popping them in. I think that's pretty good. Let's compare the two. Let's compare the sample that I'd pre-made with this one, just to see. Yeah, I think I like it softer. We're going to leave it like that and keep going. So now around the edge of the card, I'm going to come in with the over coffee, and we're going to just add a bit more depth around there. Let's cover up our little camel still, because we're not quite ready for him yet. And we'll just come in with some of this, and we're just going to pounce this in. Just to deepen off those edges a bit. So your pouncing is where you, again, ink just the end of the brush, and then as you apply it, it's like a stippling, but you let the bristles of the brush bend a little bit. And that way, this clean part of the brush is actually helping to do that blending. The trick to it too is to actually have your card, I'm just checking that Matthew can see this well in the camera shot. Actually, I'm going to put myself at a bit of an angle at the moment just so you can see it better on the camera. So I've got my card so that as I'm applying the brush, I'm applying most of the colour off the edge of the paper and letting that brush bend onto the card. Once I've got a bit of ink on, I can then work into the card a little bit until I've got that really blended out. We don't want this edge being harsh at all. So apply our colour and then work it in a little bit. Now you'll also see I'm only doing a small section at a time. If I don't try and do too much, the inks will actually dry before I've had a chance to blend them out. So we start off with a small area and then blend it into the card. Just make sure that you turn your card around so that you're always working with that part of the brush facing off the card. If you're doing your card and you end up coming around like this, you're going to just be putting blobs on the card. So you must make sure that you turn your card so that you're at a comfortable angle for that brush to be pointing away from you and away from the card. You can always apply some more ink if you need more depth. Harder to remove colour if you apply too much. Now on our rocks, we're going to use the same colour, but we're going to switch brushes for this. We'll keep our big brush standing by for a bit of blending, but we're actually going to use a small number 2 Filbert brush. This is a very fine brush. As you can see, if I hold it on the angle, you can see that it's quite lacking in bristles, and it's got that rounded filbert shape, which means that we can work it into areas. So again, you only ink the end of the brush, and then we're just going to pat it where there would be shadows around the rock. So we place it on, and then we can drag it up a little bit, and then if we need some extra blending, this is where we bring the bigger brush in. In fact, I think we might put a little bit of brown colour all over that first, and then we'll just add it a little bit deeper. So let's give it just a bit of brown everywhere. Now let's come in and add depth. So I'm looking for wherever there's layers of rock that I can apply some shadows to. Again, if you need to support your card, just pop a bit of paper down so you're not putting your hands all over the card. Let's work that in. And particularly if it's starting to come up too high or it needs a bit of softening, just come in and just buff it a bit with your bigger brush. And also the same as when we're doing around our edges and things, don't try and work a large area at a time, just work a smaller area so you've got a chance to get it blended out before that ink has time to dry. I'm dragging it up a bit and then coming in with my big brush and just buffing it back. But you can start to see already, see the difference between where we've just got a bit of basic ink and where we're starting to add that shadow. So let's look at where else we can put it in behind these rocks. You can see now while I'm using a finer brush, even though with the big pouncy brushes we can push them down and make them have an edge, it's still hard to get into fine spots like this. So the little brushes just make this so much easier. If you're happy with the blending, you don't have to worry about the big brush. It's just if you think you need to do a little bit of buffing there, it's a nice way to do it. Okay, let's head over here. And I'm just going to pop a little bit of dark on the lower edge of those rocks, which will just make them stand out a little bit from the ground area. Let's add some more shadow around here, without going over a little camel. And don't forget this little bit that's sticking out the side here, that is rocks as well, so that needs a little bit of our colouring. So let's just put a bit of brown in there and then a bit of our shadowing browns. We certainly don't want this standing out as different to the other side of him. Now with our camel, I'm going to add some orange tones into him because I don't want him looking the same as the ground. So let's just cover up. We will use some of the coffee as well, but I'm just going to add a little bit of Tiki torch just to make him look a little bit, to change the tone of him. And we're going to, I mentioned that you can change the shape of your brush by laying your brush down. If I actually squish now, I'll do this on an angle to the camera so we can see. If I squish the brush down, put pressure on it, and then wiggle side to side, see how I can get a crisp edge and a soft edge. So the bristles of the brush are actually blending this out as a soft edge, but the fact that I've got the bristles to a sharp point edge here gives us a harder edge. So that means in practicalities with your card, if I push my card, let's turn it around this way so you can see, if I push my brush down and wiggle it, I can get in right next to his neck there without going over onto the rocks area. Let's move him around and wiggle a bit in there. So I'm wiggling a bit in and then I'm just giving it a buff with those clean bristles just to blend it out. And we're actually going to go all the way around him. Put a bit onto his ears if I can get them without going over the edges. I'll come back in definitely with the finer brush to get those ears. So pop our brush down, give it a bit of a shade, a bit of a buff if we need to, and you can see that's given him a little bit of, I'm going to put some brown on now, but you can see it makes him stand out a bit from all the earthy colours behind him. So let's grab, before we put the browns in, let's grab a fine Filbert brush again, and with our orange, just going to give a bit of colour to his eye there, and we'll grab those ears. So the Filbert brush I can just buff in and get fairly close to my edges there. And we're also going to give him a little bit of colour on the inside of his mouth, trying hard not to get on his teeth because it would be great if they stand out looking really white. Okay, let's grab our little brown Filbert brush, and that's all we need of the Tiki torch. So we'll go back to our over coffee, and let's pick up that bit of colour on the end of the brush, and again work it along the edges of him. Now we've already got a bit of ink on here, so it's already got a little bit of slip. So I don't have to be quite so worried about the ink grabbing. I can work a little bit bigger area or longer area before I worry about the ink grabbing the card and not being blendable. So I can still drag that a bit. I can also drop my brush, and I can come in with my big brush and just soften that off. So you can see I did a lot bigger area than what I was doing along the edge of the card, because it's got this, what I call a slip factor to it. Let's pop some coffee in there. So even where I'm doing the brown, it's still maintaining a little bit of an orange hue to it, where I've got the orange underneath the Tiki torch, and that again, that's just so that it stands out from that background. Now let's shade underneath his jaw there. Which is going to make the actual panel of the jaw stand out more. We'll shade some of his outer part of his face. And I'm going to shade the ears. They're just a bit too bright, aren't they? They definitely need toning down. When you're colouring on gloss card, it's not an accurate colouring. It's more a suggestion of colour. So don't be too stressed if you do go over your lines a little bit. That's the nature of working on gloss card. You don't colour accurately like you can when you're colouring with pencils or watercolours. Let's just get our brush and just buff in there. But you can see, you can still get, by using the smaller brush, you can still get some quite fine areas, and we've managed to get a lovely transition of colour from the brown through a peachy tone, the yellow, and then out to almost white. So it really makes that muzzle area stand out. Okay, let's have a look at our blues for the sky. So this is where I'm going to use the Something Borrowed. So I'm switching my brushes back to the number 10 size, and I've got a light blue and a dark blue brush. So light blue, I will grab my Something Borrowed. And I'll also, I'm going to pop that out of there out of the way. I'll also put my mask over here so I've got somewhere to hang on to. Back again to starting off the edge of the card and just shading on, at least until I get some ink built up and get things started. Then I can actually bring the brush in and smudge it, because I want to get, I'm putting the pressure on so I'm getting edge to the brush, but I don't actually want to go right up to the mountains, to the rocks. I actually want to leave that little bit of a white glow. So circles, then I can put the brush on and just smudge it a bit. Circles and then a bit of smudgy. Now if I want to get a bit closer to the camel, I would pop the mask back in there and just hold that in place and just circle a bit of blue in between his ears. Now we come in with our suede shoes, which is a deeper blue, so I'm going to switch to my darker blue brush, and we'll go back to doing the pouncing type action and just darken off the top of the sky there. Now I can see I've got a little bit of an area there where that's a bit too strong and I'm not too happy with, but I feel that once I come in with this next blue, that should hopefully cover and blend out. Sometimes you get your blending absolutely perfect and other times you don't. And that's sometimes just the nature of it. If it's too bad, you can turn it into a cloud. I'd really like to have just brilliant blue skies for this one. Let's see if we can just smoosh over it a little bit. So I'm starting off again at the edge of the card and then working in a bit as I've got less ink on the brush. Around the corner a bit and blending in. If I got a little bit too much, I'd grab my lighter blue brush and just buff it back a little bit. But that looks like pretty much, that's an Aussie sunny sky with that rich blue. Fabulous. Now I just think it needs, the parched earth is looking good, but I want to add a little bit of extra stamping there, and we're going to start off with coffee, which is the middle brown, and then come in with a little bit of icing on the cake, the darker brown. I just want to add a bit of dead looking grasses in there. So I'm going to use the tall grasses out of our grass set. The middle grass. So this one that's got a few wavy fronds, and I'm going to use the smaller reeds out of the reed set. So let's just go with the grasses first, and this will do with the over coffee, which is the middle tone brown. I'll ink up just the top half of the stamp and stamp it up here. I can stamp again. Now to keep on stamping, I'm actually going to clean that long frond off. And now when I ink, I'm not going to ink that one because I don't want great tall bits on everywhere. So we can ink by just inking the grass bits to the side of that, on either side. And then we can stamp it and not get that tall bit. So you don't always have to use all of your stamp. It's a matter of looking at what your picture needs and then adjusting from there. So let's stamp it a little bit over there as well. And we're going to add in just some extra bits until we've run out of ink on that stamp. Now I'll come in with the deeper icing on the cake and our little reeds. Now mostly I say take your ink pad to your stamp. When you've got your smaller stamps, sometimes it's easier to tap those on the ink pad, but never push, particularly on something like the Catherine Pooler ink pads where they're a very squishy foam. It means they hold the ink beautifully and that the ink comes off on your stamp and gives you a really good image, but you must not push. You must just tap, otherwise you'll end up with ink everywhere. And a little tap is plenty of ink. So now we can come in and just add some extra little reeds, another little tap. We can do a full one and then a few half ones. Let's quickly pop our camel mask back in again so we can pop some grass. Wherever we've put the mask on, it means our grasses and things will go in behind him, which is what we want. We want him standing out at the front. Okay, so that's given us, by adding that little bit of dead grasses at the front, it gives us a little bit of perspective and just fills that bottom edge in a little bit. I really like that. I think I'm loving the blending on the camel, and I like this bit of a glow that we've got round. I think it does give that sort of, I guess you do call it heat haze, that look where things almost glow when the sun's hitting them. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that one. That's all I'm going to add to this one. Often I'll do extra embossing over the top, but I don't think it needs it with this one, and that's why I embossed the camel, so that he comes forward and is right in the foreground. So we're not going to add any more to that one. We'll just leave it like that. It could be mounted up on a dark brown or a black card and will look fabulous. Okay, so thank you for joining us for a bit of gloss card work and with some Aussie summer scenes. We'll be doing some more Aussie summer soon, and I hope to see you then. Don't forget, this week is playing in the classroom, the subscribers classroom for I think a month, and so you can access it and watch it as many times as you like. Okay, thanks for watching. See you soon.